We have several questions and 16 minutes and 28 seconds. So I will try to shoot off a few questions, but I would encourage and please the panel to answer short and concisely. I give you a minute each max for each answer. And the first question comes from Lane Horndike at JRC, and when I read it I said that's exactly the question I wanted to ask too. And that has to do with a rather provocative statement that Bill Clark made about from science to policy, I think, that was the wrong label. I'm very fond of that label, I might add. So Lane's question is, and I would extend it to the whole panel, but start with Bill. How should IIASA, in practice, include knowledge, not only science, in its work and initiate action, not just policy advice? And maybe we start with Bill, 1 minute at most. It goes automatically when you start talking.
Do what you did when you did your work on acid rain, and do the story we just heard from the CSIRO Marie Darling study.
I think that's very sound. I thought we were doing that, right? Okay, anybody else wants to comment on that? Maybe Ralph, you want to say something?
Just a couple short comments. One, it's a decision that you want to do that, and that has to be made. It can't be just, oh, that sounds like a great idea. Somebody needs to implement it and make it happen, wherever it is the case. And then I would always consider these the first times, because it's safer, say, a few of these are experiments. Do your best, learn a few things. Bill said, and everybody knows in the room, you're not going to do the greatest job the first time you do anything that's complex. So do it a few times, make some errors about how you engage, who you use, etc. And then it'll probably get a lot better and be easier to do.
Thank you. And Andrew, you want to comment?
Well, I don't want to be sound to be blowing my trumpet too hard here. I think just building on some of Bill's comments earlier as well, I think having a very deliberate focus at the very beginning on the path to impact and actually formalising and institutionalising that in the way that IIASA does business is crucial. It's non-trivial, but crucial. So having an explicit eye to the path to on-ground action a priori is something that we've tried to embrace at an institutional level in CSIRO, and has been very challenging in a whole range of dimensions. But it's also been incredibly liberating and stimulating. And I would also argue it's restored the nation's confidence in us as the National Science Agency to actually make a positive contribution to some of the most challenging issues that the nation's seeking to work its way through. So that would be my gratuitous advice to Pavel in the front row there.
Thank you. I would just want to add the comment that while I agree with everything that was said, I don't think it invalidates the notion from science to policy. If you interpret policy as including action and science as including knowledge.
I would just turn it upside down and say policy makers are one of the sets of clients
Absolutely.
of useful science-based analysis. But we make a mistake on several orders if we treat them as the primary or only ones for all the reasons of civic engagement, trust building, and so on. I think if you asked Lane to answer his own question, which would be a good idea, one would find that it tends to be, as I think came out very well in the CSIRO case, partnerships of a policymaker, political leader, who is prepared to take some of the hit and risk of setting up a thing like this, but then that being backed up by a commitment on the part of the science community to engage continually and deeply with those whose lives will be affected, whose actions are going to be critical, and so on and so on.
Yeah, I think the key words you mentioned were engagement and participation, and I think that we should do more of that at IIASA. The next question comes from Thomas Hendricks, European Environment Agency, and it was also addressed to Bill Clark, but I'd like actually to David McCallum to take a shot at this because it's about uncertainty. And I know that, uncertainty is a big topic in IIASA's modeling aspects, and particularly in the energy field. So the question is the following. Traditional science often aims to reduce, limit, or quantify uncertainty. To what degree is this aim a potential hindrance to holistically informing policy decisions in the context of more structural uncertainties? How can we improve the way to embrace uncertainty? Let me start with David.
Well, we can never remove uncertainty fully from the problem, and that's why we need to, I think, to do these kind of analyses that we're increasingly doing at IIASA and have been done for a long time, large ensembles of scenarios that explore the full scenario space. Doing this in systematic ways, discrete ways, doing this in Monte Carlo ways, stochastic ways, explicitly taking into account uncertainty. I'm a proponent of this option-focused policy, inside policy solution advice that Andrew Johnson discussed yesterday. And I think that doing this kind of thing where we're putting all these options on the table, developing large ensembles, can be a way to reduce the uncertainty, but explaining through the analysis, trying to explain to the policymaker where are the key points of uncertainty. Because this is what we learn. This is what we, as scientists, this is what we learn from our models and have to deduce and reduce when we're coming up with our message.
Thank you. Anybody else wants to chime in on that topic? Okay. Well, the next question is by Saurabh Garg, Applied Materials Incorporated, California, USA. It is addressed to Professor Clark, but I also would like to others to chime in. In your model describing functional relationships between human development and capital, institutions and knowledge systems, how do we ensure equalitarian use and distribution of various capital types, avoid mismanagement of institutions that govern and exercise control of those resources for equitable human development across different classes of society? So it's the equity question.
Well, this may be a lawyer's reading of it, but how you do it is, in fact, through the institutions and political and legal frameworks that arrive at a consensus and then enforce it on what kind of minority rights, what protection of disenfranchised, and so on and so on. A less lawyerly action at the other extreme is within that cartoon of a formulation I gave. You as an evaluator can put in whatever weights you personally view as appropriate for future generations versus current ones, whatever values you view as appropriate for penalizing inequitable distribution of resources or benefits from them or not. The reason I start with the politics is when you go from the weights you prefer to the rates that society might sanction, one, I think, needs to run through a political and legal process. That's the only way we have of doing this. There aren't computational approaches to do that, unless I missed the question.
Thank you. Anybody else wants to comment on equity? Okay, we have many more very challenging and interesting questions, so we must have stimulated some people in the room. But unfortunately, we're getting pretty close to the end. And I would like to ask the panel one question, and that is about the implications of what we heard today on IIASA's research agenda. So particularly, I'd like everybody to comment on, in the context of the strategic plan, so don't challenge that, in the context of the 10-year strategic plan, we are obviously open to any smart ideas for improvement in the longer-term, mid-term research agenda, and what can we learn from the current panel and your other insights about how to shape that research agenda. And I'll start with Carl Sigmund here on my left.
Okay, concerning the game theoretical applications, the applications in economics took a very long time before they got really serious and fruitful. For instance, in the broadband auctions. And there it was found very useful to make first experiments with 20 undergraduates simulating the players. And yes. And in a similar vein, I think one could make experiments simulating negotiations like in the Kyoto Treaty or similar things, and try experimentally on a very low level to implement the complex ratification procedures. That would be, I think, an interesting thing that would fit quite well with a strategic plan.
Thank you very much. Andrew, I think I know what your answer will be, and I will say yes, absolutely. So go ahead.
I've already perhaps partially answered this question, and I should have offered, by way of context, I think the forward agenda for IIASA is very robust and very exciting, so I think there's a lot to look forward to there. Excuse me. The only other point I might make, based on, again, some of reflections from our own experience in the South, is how empowering and incredibly enabling it can be in the context of trying to bring other knowledge systems to bear on some of the problems that we're trying to face, and Bill touched on this as well. So in the context of water management, very confronting challenge for those of us who are Western trained scientists was the integration of the knowledge systems of the indigenous peoples of the basin in terms of working through a range of alternative scenarios for future water allocation. And that whole process fundamentally reshaped the approach that we took to the integration of knowledge, the representation of risk and uncertainty, and the way in which we communicated results back into the community. And so again, when you think about IIASA's agenda, particularly in the developing world, there's a whole domain of expertise, knowledge, wisdom, and a constituency there that perhaps some more thought may need to be given to in terms of how that capacity is enabled for the benefit of IIASA.
Thank you. That's what I had imagined you would say, and I would summarize it by saying learn from the success stories. And we have certainly Lane's success story in the European Communion asset rain debate, your success story. There's something there, and they all involve more participatory approaches, more engagement of stakeholders, etc., etc. Ralph, what do you think?
The reasons to address any of the problems the IIASA addresses is given in what you hope to achieve, and that's stated in the mission, well-being. It would be worthwhile perhaps to have a project that really defined that very well for what IIASA is trying to accomplish. That gets to be used over and over and over because it's the back end of what you hope to achieve on everything done here. You need to adapt it perhaps, but it's the basis for any specific analysis. Secondly, I think more effort could be used on explicitly trying to create alternatives or options that might be very important on the decisions being addressed. And for both of those, you need tremendous involvement from the people on whom you're concerned about the impacts. And third, a very quick one, communication is so crucial to any of the impact IIASA has. It's wonderful when they have impact. It's a relatively terrific place to have it for those decisions that are made by others, and might be useful to try a little systems analysis on that problem, the problem of how should we communicate well, what do we hope to achieve by doing it, and actively learning in that.
Thank you, Ralph. David?
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about education, science education, interdisciplinary education, systems analysis education over the past 2 days. And this also figures prominently in IIASA's 10-year research agenda in the form of the IIASA Young Scientist Summer Program, the Postdoc Program, the new South African YSSP Program. I myself am a product of this Young Scientist Summer Program, and I know there are others out here in the audience, so it's quite successful. But what about the people who aren't in this room, who haven't yet made the choice to follow the systems analysis as a career? This hints at what Bill Clark was saying at the very end of his talk. Why do we punish people for straying outside of the strict disciplines and following this interdisciplinary path? It's a buzzword, but I think there's still a way to bring people into this field. It's an important field. To me, the simple answer is jobs. And when the jobs are out there, I think they'll come. There's one final point. There's a growing debate across the world today about what is the purpose of higher education, university education. And there are a lot of different answers and people have different opinions. But if you ask students in surveys, what is shown is jobs. Can I get a job after I graduate? This is what they care most about. And until people can get a job in this area and then can come work at a place like IIASA,
Thank you.
That can be part of the next 10 years.
Well, you know, Ralph and Bill got a job after IIASA, so and they did pretty well. So maybe we use those examples as well. Professor Clark, you have the last word, and
Let's hear it for
we're just about in our last minute too. So,
okay. So let me do comments. One, just following up on your YSSP experience. I don't know how you fix universities and so on, especially my own. But I think for systems analysis, we have to link back to the comments Diana Liverman made in the previous panel. One of the reasons we all get penalized for straying out of the disciplines is disciplines have discipline. They can rank good work versus bad work. And our community in doing applied systems analysis has not been good, even in trying to do serious quality control and standards of good practice. As I say, we haven't even tried, much less gotten into what would be the difference between doing really good disciplining of the work and not. So that's the first thing IIASA should take a lead in. The other piece is looking, the one piece of IIASA's current strategic plan that feels to me just dreadfully old-fashioned when I look at the sustainable development debate in the world today, is IIASA continues the sectoral analysis, the sectoral alignments that date all the way back to its founding. You do energy studies and food studies and water studies as though on the ground people lived in one of those sectors and not the other. I'm not saying there isn't a place for them, but I am saying today the challenges of sustainability are people have to advance their well-being by getting the energy and the water and the habitation and the transport right in particular places. So I would love to see emerging here at IIASA some regionally focused integrative studies that tried to take these models of sustainability and metrics of them and actually do the set of worked examples as to how a region wanting to measure and then evaluate policies for advancing sustainability would do it.
I agree, and if you read the strategic plan carefully, it says all that. On that note,
that doesn't help.
I will thank the panel, give them all a big hand of applause, and we're ready for a break.